The silk wedding gown her mother had spent 3 months sewing hung like a noose in the wardrobe. And Vivian Thorne knew if she did not run tonight, she would wear it to her own funeral in 7 days. She waited until the grandfather clock in the parlor struck 2 before sliding from beneath her quilts, already dressed in the plainest cotton dress she owned, her hair braided tight against her skull. The October night air in Charleston, South Carolina, carried the salt tang of the harbor and the jasmine that climbed the trellis outside her window. She had packed nothing except what could fit in the carpet bag she had hidden under the loose floorboard 3 weeks ago. 2 changes of clothes, her grandmother's pearl earrings, and every dollar she had saved from birthday gifts over the years. $147. Enough to disappear, she prayed. Her fingers trembled as she eased the window open. The trellis creaked under her weight, but held, and within moments her boots touched the soft earth of her mother's rose garden. She did not look back at the only home she had ever known. Looking back would break her resolve, and resolve was all she had. By dawn, she was on a westbound train, having purchased her ticket from a bleary-eyed clerk who barely glanced at her face. She told him she was traveling to meet her husband in Atlanta. The lie came easily because the truth was too dangerous to speak aloud. She was running from Clarence Whitmore, the man her father had chosen to be her husband, a man 40 years her senior with hands that left bruises and eyes that promised worse. Vivian was 22 years old enough that her parents called her a spinster, old enough that they had grown desperate to marry her off to anyone who would have her. Clarence Whitmore had money and position, and that was all that mattered to her father. That Clarence's first 2 wives had died under mysterious circumstances seemed to concern no one but Vivian herself. The train carried her through Georgia and into Alabama, then onto Mississippi. She changed trains in Jackson, buying a ticket further west with shaking hands, certain at any moment someone would recognize her, would drag her back. But no one looked twice at a lone woman traveling in a simple dress with a worn carpet bag. She was invisible, and invisibility was its own kind of freedom. By the time she crossed into Texas, she had been traveling for 4 days. Her money was dwindling faster than she had anticipated. Food was expensive, and lodging even more so. She began sleeping in train stations, her carpet bag clutched to her chest, jerking awake at every sound. In El Paso, she made a decision that would change everything. She would push on to New Mexico territory, to a town she had seen mentioned in a newspaper someone had left on a train seat, Lordsburg, New Mexico. It was small and remote, the kind of place where a woman might disappear entirely, the kind of place where Clarence Whitmore and her father would never think to look. The last leg of her journey took her through landscape, unlike anything she had ever seen. Gone were the soft green hills of the south, the humidity that clung to skin like a second dress. Here, the earth was red and brown, punctuated by scrub brush and towering rock formations that seemed to grow straight from the ground like ancient sentinels. The sky stretched wider than seemed possible, an endless blue that hurt to look at. She arrived in Lordsburg with $23 to her name and no plan beyond finding work and a place to sleep. The town was small, a collection of wooden buildings clustered along a single main street, with the railroad tracks cutting through like a scar. The October sun beat down with surprising intensity, and dust coated everything in a fine red powder. The first place she tried was the hotel, a 2-story structure with a hand-painted sign that read, Lordsburg Grand Hotel, though there was nothing grand about it. The proprietor, a thin woman with suspicious eyes, looked Vivian up and down. "We do not hire single women," the woman said flatly. "Not that kind of establishment." Vivian felt her cheeks burn. "I was not looking for that kind of work. I can cook, clean, keep books." "Got no need for it. Try the restaurant down the street." The restaurant was no better. Neither was the general store, the livery, or the saloon, though the saloon owner at least had the decency to look apologetic. "It is not that I do not believe you are respectable, miss," he said, wiping down the bar with a rag that looked like it had never seen soap. "But a young woman working in a saloon draws the wrong kind of attention. I cannot risk it." By the time the sun began to set, Vivian was sitting on a bench outside the train station, her carpetbag at her feet, fighting back tears. She had come so far, risked everything, and for what? To starve in a town that did not want her? "You look lost." The voice was deep and rough, like gravel underfoot. Vivian looked up and found herself staring at a man who seemed carved from the very mountains that ringed the horizon. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to block out the setting sun. His hair was dark brown and fell past his collar, and several days' worth of beard shadowed a jaw that looked like it had been chiseled from granite. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a startling green that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed lies. He wore buckskin trousers and a cotton shirt that strained across a chest, thick with muscle. A hunting knife hung from his belt, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who had never questioned his place in the world. "I am fine," Vivian said, which was perhaps the greatest lie she had told since leaving Charleston. The man tilted his head, studying her with those unsettling green eyes. "You have been sitting here for 3 hours. Watched you try every business on this street, none of them hiring." So he had been watching her. The thought should have frightened her. But something in his voice suggested curiosity rather than threat. "Apparently single women are not welcome in Lordsburg," she said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "They are suspicious of strangers. Town had some trouble a few years back with a woman who turned out to be scouting for a gang of outlaws. Now they assume every newcomer is up to no good." He shifted his weight, and Vivian realized he was carrying supplies, sacks of flour and sugar, a crate of canned goods. "You running from something or to something?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. She should have lied. Should have invented a story about a dead husband or a teaching position that had fallen through. Instead, she found herself saying, "From something?" He nodded as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. "Got a name?" "Vivian Thorne." "Mason Xavier. Most folks call me Mace." He adjusted the supplies in his arms. "I have a cabin about 5 miles north of here, up in the foothills. Been thinking I could use some help getting the place ready for winter. Cannot pay much, but there is a spare room and 3 meals a day. Interested?" Every rule her mother had ever taught her about proper behavior screamed that she should refuse. Going off alone with a strange man to an isolated cabin was the height of foolishness. But Vivian had left proper behavior behind in Charleston, along with her silk wedding gown. "What kind of help?" she asked cautiously. "Cooking, mostly. Some cleaning. I have got preserves that need putting up, meat that needs smoking. Winter comes hard up in the mountains, and I spend most of my time hunting and trapping to get ready for it. Last few years I have been doing it all myself, but I am getting tired of eating my own cooking." The corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been a smile. "Fair warning, I am not the best company. Go days without seeing another soul sometimes. If you are looking for excitement, you will not find it." Vivian stood, picking up her carpetbag. "Mr. Xavier, I have had enough excitement to last me a lifetime. When do we leave?" They left within the hour, after Mace finished loading his supplies onto a sturdy pack mule. Vivian walked beside him as they headed north out of town, following a trail that quickly left civilization behind. The terrain grew rougher, the scrub brush giving way to juniper and pine as they climbed into the foothills. Mace did not talk much, which suited Vivian fine. She was exhausted from days of travel and the emotional toll of constant fear. But the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It felt almost companionable, as if they had known each other far longer than an hour. The sun had fully set by the time they reached the cabin, and Vivian could see little beyond what the moon revealed. The structure was larger than she had expected, built from solid logs with a stone chimney rising from one end. Mace lit a lantern and ushered her inside. The interior was sparse but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a simple kitchen area along another. A table and 2 chairs occupied the center of the room, and she could see 2 doors leading to what must be bedrooms. "You take the room on the left," Mace said, setting down the supplies. "I will get a fire going and make us something to eat. You must be hungry." Vivian realized she had not eaten since that morning, and even then it had only been a stale biscuit. "Thank you, I can help." "Tomorrow. Tonight you rest." The room he had given her was small but comfortable, with a real bed covered in what looked like a bearskin, a small dresser, and a washstand. She set her carpetbag down and simply stood there for a moment, letting the reality of her situation sink in. She was in New Mexico territory, in a cabin with a man she had met less than 2 hours ago, hundreds of miles from everything she had ever known. And for the first time in months, she felt safe. When she emerged from the room, Mace had a pot of stew warming over the fire. The smell made her stomach clench with hunger. He dished out 2 bowls and they ate in silence, sitting at the table. The stew was simple but good, thick with meat and vegetables. "This is delicious," Vivian said, and meant it. Mace shrugged. "It is just rabbit and whatever vegetables I had left from the garden, nothing fancy. After days of stale bread and jerky, it tastes like a feast." He studied her over his bowl. "How far did you run?" She hesitated, then decided he deserved some truth. "South Carolina." His eyebrows rose. "That is a considerable distance. Whatever you were running from must have been bad." "An arranged marriage to a man who—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "To a man who would have hurt you," Mace finished softly. There was no question in his voice, only statement. Vivian nodded, staring down at her stew. "Well, he will not find you here. I can promise you that." The certainty in his voice made her look up. "I meant what I said earlier. You are safe here, Miss Thorne. I am offering you honest work for honest pay. Nothing more, nothing less. You have my word on that." "Why?" The question burst out before she could stop it. "Why would you help a complete stranger?" Mace was quiet for a long moment. "My sister ran away from a bad situation once. She did not make it very far before they caught her and brought her back. I was just a boy, could not do anything to help her. She died 3 months later. They said it was fever, but I always wondered." He met Vivian's eyes. "I could not help her. Maybe I can help you." Tears burned at the back of Vivian's throat. "I am sorry about your sister. It was a long time ago." He stood, collecting their bowls. "You should get some sleep. Tomorrow we will start getting ready for winter, and there is a lot of work to do." Vivian lay awake for a long time that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness around the cabin. Somewhere an owl hooted. The wind rustled through the pines, and from the other room came the steady sound of Mace's breathing as he slept. She had traded one unknown for another, but at least this unknown had been her choice. The next morning, Vivian woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. She dressed quickly and emerged to find Mace already up and moving, despite the early hour. Dawn was just breaking through the cabin windows. "Morning," he said, flipping bacon in a cast-iron skillet. "Coffee is on the stove. Help yourself." The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but Vivian drank it gratefully. Mace piled eggs and bacon onto plates, and they ate quickly, efficiently, like people with work to do. "Today I need to show you around, get you familiar with the place," Mace said as they cleaned up. "Tomorrow I am heading up into the high country to check my trap lines. I will be gone 2, maybe 3 days. You will be alone here. Need to make sure you know where everything is, how to handle things if something goes wrong." The thought of being alone in the wilderness should have terrified her. But instead, Vivian felt a strange sense of anticipation. What could go wrong? Bears, mostly. They are getting ready for winter same as us, looking for food. You need to know how to fire a rifle and how to secure the cabin if one comes around. He must have seen the expression on her face because he added, "They usually leave people alone if you leave them alone. But usually is not always." He spent the morning teaching her the layout of the property. Behind the cabin was a root cellar dug into the hillside, stocked with potatoes, onions, and carrots from his summer garden. A smokehouse stood nearby, empty now, but ready for the meat he would bring in from his hunting. A small corral held 2 horses and the pack mule, and further down the hill was a stream that provided fresh water year-round. Then came the rifle lesson. Mace produced a Winchester repeater from inside the cabin and took her to a clearing where he had set up targets against a hillside. "Ever fired a gun before?" he asked. "Never." "All right. First thing you need to know is a gun is a tool, nothing more. You respect it like you would respect an axe or a saw. It has a job to do, and if you use it right, it will do that job. Use it wrong, and you or someone else gets hurt." He showed her how to hold the rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to account for the weapon's kick. The first time she fired, the recoil nearly knocked her backwards, but Mace steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. "Try again. Plant your feet firmer this time." They spent 2 hours at target practice. By the end, Vivian was hitting the targets more often than not, and her shoulder ached from the rifle's kick. "You are a quick learner," Mace said approvingly as they walked back to the cabin. "Tomorrow, before I leave, we will do another session. I want you comfortable with that rifle." The afternoon was spent in the cabin kitchen. Mace brought up crates of vegetables from the root cellar and showed her his preserving setup. Together, they peeled and chopped, filling mason jars with pickled vegetables and fruit preserves. It was hard, hot work, and by the time the sun set, Vivian's hands were wrinkled from the brine and her back ached. But she felt satisfied in a way she never had back in Charleston. There, her days had been filled with useless accomplishments: embroidery, piano lessons, the careful art of pouring tea and making small talk. Here, every action had purpose. The food they preserved today would keep them alive through the winter. "You did good work today," Mace said that evening as they ate dinner. Most city women would have complained about the labor. "I am tired of being useless," Vivian said. "Back home, I was nothing but an ornament. Something to be dressed up and displayed and eventually sold off to the highest bidder. You are not an ornament." The firmness in his voice made her look up. "You are a person, with your own thoughts and feelings and the right to choose your own path. Not according to my father. Your father is wrong." The simple declaration hung in the air between them. No one had ever said that to her before. No one had ever suggested that her father, the patriarch of the Thorne family, might be anything other than absolutely right in his decisions. Do you really believe that? she asked quietly. That I have the right to choose. I believe every person has that right, man or woman. Mace leaned back in his chair. Out here, there is no one to tell you what you can or cannot do. The land does not care if you are male or female, rich or poor, educated or ignorant. It only cares if you are strong enough to survive it, and strength comes in many forms. That night, Vivian lay in bed thinking about his words. The right to choose. Such a simple concept, yet one that had been denied to her all her life. What would she choose if she truly had the freedom? Not the grand choices like career or lifestyle, but the small ones. When to wake and when to sleep. What to eat for breakfast. Whether to wear her hair up or down. Whether to stay in this cabin with a mountain man who looked at her like she was a person rather than a possession. The next day passed in much the same manner as the first. More target practice in the morning until Mace declared himself satisfied with her shooting. More preserving in the afternoon, this time working on the meat in the smokehouse. Venison from a deer Mace had taken the week before, the meat rubbed with salt and hung to cure. When I get back, I will teach you how to tan hides, Mace said. Waste nothing out here. The meat feeds us. The hide becomes clothing or blankets. The bones can be carved into tools. How long have you lived like this? Vivian asked. 10 years, give or take. Came out west after my sister died. Could not stand to be back east anymore, with all its rules and expectations. Worked as a scout for a while, then a buffalo hunter until the herd started disappearing. Ended up here about 5 years ago and decided to stay. Built this cabin with my own hands. Do you ever get lonely? He considered the question. Sometimes. But I would rather be lonely and free than surrounded by people and trapped. At least out here, the only person I have to answer to is myself. Vivian understood that sentiment more than she could express. That evening, after supper was cleaned up, Mace laid out his plans for the next few days on the table. He had hand-drawn maps showing his trap lines in the high country, where the streams and passes were, and where to find him if she needed him. If there is an emergency, take the bay mare. She is the steadiest of the horses. Follow this trail here until you reach the fork, then head west. You will find me somewhere along this route. His finger traced the line on the map. But unless something is really wrong, just wait here. I will be back in 3 days at most. I will be fine, Vivian assured him, hoping she sounded more confident than she felt. Mace studied her face. You are nervous. A little, but also excited, strange as that sounds. I have never been truly alone before. There was always my family or servants or someone watching over me. If you get scared, bar the door and stay inside with a rifle. Most animals will not bother you if you stay in the cabin. And if you do have to fire the rifle, aim for center mass and do not hesitate. Something means you harm, you stop it. Understand? I understand. He nodded, seemingly satisfied. Then I will see you in 3 days, Miss Thorne. Vivian, she corrected. You can call me Vivian. Something shifted in his expression, softened. All right, Vivian. You can call me Mace. He left before dawn the next morning, his pack loaded with supplies and his own rifle slung across his back. Vivian stood in the doorway and watched until he disappeared into the trees, then turned back to the cabin. It was just her now. The first day alone passed slowly. Vivian busied herself with chores, throwing herself into work to avoid thinking too much about her situation. She cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, reorganized the pantry, baked bread that turned out only slightly burned on the bottom. She practiced with the rifle again, this time alone, feeling more confident with each shot. The second day was harder. The novelty of solitude had worn off, replaced by a creeping awareness of how isolated she truly was. The nearest town was 5 miles away. The nearest neighbor, Mace had mentioned, was even further. If something happened to her out here, no one would know. But nothing happened. The hours passed peacefully, marked only by the sun's journey across the sky and the evening calls of birds settling to roost. On the third day, Vivian found herself watching the trail, waiting for Mace's return. She told herself it was not because she missed him specifically, but simply because she missed human company. But that was a lie, and she was getting tired of lying to herself. The truth was that she had been thinking about Mace constantly, about the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, rare as that was, about the calm confidence in his voice when he taught her things, about the sheer physical presence of him, all that controlled strength housed in a body that looked like it had been carved from oak. She had never felt this way about anyone before. Certainly not about Clarence Whitmore, who had inspired nothing but revulsion. She had read about love in novels, about the way it could make your heart race and your thoughts scatter. But she had always assumed such descriptions were exaggerations. They were not exaggerations. Mace returned just before sunset on the third day, leading his horse and carrying a string of rabbits and what looked like a fox pelt. Vivian heard him coming and met him outside the cabin, relief flooding through her at the sight of him. "Everything all right?" he asked, reading her expression. "Fine. Perfect. I am just glad you are back." He handed her the rabbits. "Fresh meat for dinner. I will take care of the horse and then clean these." They fell into an easy rhythm over the following weeks. Mace would go out hunting or checking his traps, sometimes for a day, sometimes for several. Vivian would maintain the cabin, cook, preserve food, and gradually take on more of the outdoor chores. She learned to chop wood, muck out the corral, and even helped Mace butcher a deer he brought back one cold November morning. The work was hard, harder than anything she had done in her privileged Charleston life, but it was satisfying. She could see the results of her labor in the stocked root cellar, the rows of preserved food, the neat stack of firewood by the cabin door. And slowly, carefully, she and Mace began to talk, not just about practical matters, but about their lives, their pasts, their thoughts on everything from politics to philosophy. Vivian discovered that beneath his quiet exterior, Mace had a sharp mind and a bone-dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. He told her about growing up in Pennsylvania, about his sister who had died too young, about his decision to leave civilization behind. She told him about Charleston, about the suffocating expectations of society, about her mother who had loved her but had never been strong enough to protect her from her father's decisions. "Do you think they are looking for me?" she asked one evening as they sat by the fire. November had brought the first real cold, and frost coated the windows. "Probably," Mace said honestly. "But they would have no reason to look this far west. Most runaways head to big cities where they can disappear into the crowds. Coming to a place like Lordsburg, that takes a different kind of thinking. Or desperation. Maybe. But desperation can be its own kind of courage." Vivian stared into the fire, watching the flames dance. "I keep waiting to feel guilty about what I did, about leaving my mother, about breaking my father's word to Clarence. But I do not feel guilty. Is that wrong? No. Your father made a choice that would have destroyed you. You made a different choice. That is not wrong. That is survival." She looked at him, at the way the firelight played across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the depth of his eyes. "Thank you for giving me this chance, Mace, for trusting me. You have earned that trust." He stood, stretching, I am turning in. We have a big day tomorrow. I want to take you up to the high meadow, show you where the elk come through. If we can bring one down before the deep snows come, we will be set for the winter. But the next morning brought the first real snowfall, fat flakes that fell steadily and piled up fast. Mace stood at the window, frowning. High country will be impassable, he said. We will have to wait until this clears. The snow fell for 3 days straight. By the time it stopped, drifts rose halfway up the cabin walls, and the world had transformed into an endless expanse of white. Vivian had never seen so much snow. Back in Charleston, they might get a light dusting once or twice a winter. This was a different scale entirely. Is it always like this? She asked, staring out at the transformed landscape. This is nothing. Wait until January. But Mace was smiling. Come on. I will show you how to move through deep snow without exhausting yourself. He produced snowshoes from a storage shed she had not known existed and spent the morning teaching her how to use them. It was awkward at first, but she got the hang of it eventually. They tramped through the snow to check on the animals in the corral, to make sure the smokehouse was secure, to verify the root cellar door had not been blocked by drifts. That night, the temperature dropped sharply. Even with the fire roaring, cold seeped through the cabin walls. Vivian piled every blanket she had on her bed and still shivered. Around midnight, a knock on her bedroom door startled her awake. Vivian, you all right in there? Mace's voice was concerned. Just cold, she called back through chattering teeth. A pause, then. The main room is warmer, closer to the fire. You should sleep out here tonight. She emerged wrapped in blankets to find Mace building up the fire. He had dragged the bearskin from her bed and spread it in front of the hearth. Sleep here, he said. I will keep the fire going. You need sleep too. I will doze in the chair. I have slept in worse conditions. But Vivian could see the exhaustion in his face. They had both been working hard to prepare for winter, and he had been shouldering the heaviest physical labor. The bearskin is large enough for 2. We can keep each other warm. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them acknowledged. Finally, Mace nodded. All right, but you stay on your side. They lay down on opposite edges of the bearskin, a careful distance between them. But as the night wore on and the temperature continued to drop, that distance gradually closed. By morning, Vivian woke to find herself pressed against Mace's broad back, her arm draped over his waist. She should have been embarrassed, should have pulled away quickly and pretended it had not happened. But his warmth felt too good, too right. She allowed herself another moment of this closeness before carefully extracting herself. When Mace woke an hour later, neither of them mentioned their shared sleep. But something had shifted between them. Some invisible line had been crossed. December brought more snow and bitterly cold temperatures. Vivian and Mace fell into a routine of sleeping by the fire on the coldest nights, always carefully maintaining that distance at first, always waking tangled together. They stopped pretending to be surprised by it. The isolation of winter threw them together in ways that would not have happened in warmer months. With travel nearly impossible, they spent long hours in the cabin together, talking, working on small projects, simply existing in each other's presence. Vivian taught Mace how to play chess using a set she carved from scraps of wood. Mace taught Vivian how to tan the hides he had accumulated, how to sew buckskin clothing, how to identify animal tracks in the snow. And slowly, inevitably, they fell in love. It was not a sudden thing, no lightning bolt moment of realization. It was gradual, built on shared work and shared space. on respect and trust and the growing awareness that each of them was happiest when the other was near. Vivian noticed it first. Noticed how her heart lifted when she heard Mace's footsteps outside the cabin. Noticed how she found excuses to brush against him as they worked side by side in the kitchen. Noticed how she studied his face when he was not looking, memorizing the planes and angles of it. She did not know if he felt the same way. Mace was not demonstrative, did not speak of feelings or emotions. But she thought she saw it in the way he looked at her sometimes. A softness in those green eyes that had not been there before. In the way he always made sure she took the first cup of coffee in the morning. In the way he had started calling her simply Vivian instead of Miss Thorne. Christmas approached. Vivian had no gifts to give, no decorations to hang. But on Christmas morning, she woke to find Mace had cut a small pine and set it up in the corner of the main room. He had hung strips of bright cloth from its branches, scraps left over from sewing projects. "I know it is not much," he said, looking almost embarrassed. "But I thought you might like to mark the day." Vivian felt tears prick at her eyes. "It is perfect. I made you something." He produced a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "It is not fancy." Inside was a pair of fur-lined gloves, beautifully crafted from soft buckskin. The stitching was neat and even, the rabbit fur lining thick and warm. "Mace, these are wonderful." She slipped them on. They fit perfectly. "Your hands were getting chapped from the cold. I thought these might help." She had nothing to give him in return, and the realization made her feel terrible. But Mace waved off her apologies. "You have given me plenty. This cabin has not felt like a home in years. Now it does." They celebrated Christmas with a special dinner. Venison steaks, the last of the potatoes fried in lard, biscuits with precious butter Mace had traded for in town during his last trip before the snows, and a dried apple pie that Vivian had made in secret using the last of their sugar. After dinner, they sat by the fire, and Mace pulled out a harmonica Vivian had not known he possessed. He played old hymns and folk songs, the music filling the cabin with unexpected sweetness. Vivian found herself humming along, then singing, her voice rusty from disuse, but growing stronger with each song. When the music finally faded, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire. "This is the best Christmas I have ever had," Vivian said softly. Mace looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw everything he could not say aloud. "Mine too." The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Vivian's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted him to kiss her, wanted it so badly she could barely breathe. But Mace did not move, and she realized he was waiting. Waiting for her to make the choice, because he would never take that choice away from her. So she made it. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. For a heartbeat, Mace went absolutely still. Then his hand came up to cup her face, gentle despite the calluses, and he kissed her back. It was nothing like the stolen kisses she had read about in novels. It was better. Real. His lips were warm and slightly chapped, and he tasted of apples and cinnamon from the pie. The kiss deepened, and Vivian felt heat bloom through her entire body, chasing away the winter cold. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mace rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "Why did you not?" "Because I needed you to be sure. Needed you to choose it." He pulled back enough to look into her eyes. "I will never be another Clarence Whitmore, Vivian. I will never take away your choices." "I know." She touched his face, feeling the rough stubble under her fingers. "That is why I am choosing you." They kissed again, slower this time, savoring it. Mace's arms came around her, pulling her close, and Vivian melted into his embrace. She had never felt safer, never felt more desired than she did in this moment. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months. But I love you. I love you too." The words were rough, almost painful, as if they had been torn from somewhere deep inside him. I tried not to. Told myself you deserved better than a mountain man with no prospects and a cabin in the middle of nowhere. But I cannot help it. I love you, Vivian Thorne. They made love that night on the bearskin in front of the fire, taking their time, learning each other's bodies with careful hands and soft whispers. Mace was gentle, always checking to make sure she was all right, that this was what she wanted. And Vivian had never been more certain of anything in her life. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Vivian's head on Mace's broad chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "What happens when spring comes?" she asked quietly. The question had been lurking in the back of her mind for weeks. "Will you want me to leave?" Mace's arms tightened around her. "No. God, no. I want you to stay. Forever, if you will have me." "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am asking you to build a life with me. If you want marriage, we can do that. If you do not, we do not have to. Whatever you choose, I am yours." Vivian propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. "I choose marriage. I choose you. I choose this life we are building together." The smile that spread across Mace's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. He pulled her down for another kiss, and the conversation ended there. They were married in February, on a day when the temperature rose just enough to make the 5-mile journey into Lordsburg an unembarrassed possible. The preacher who served the town agreed to perform the ceremony, though he looked askance at Vivian's buckskin dress and the fact that she and Mace were clearly already living together. There were no guests, no flowers, no fancy dress. Just Vivian and Mace standing in the small church, holding hands and speaking their vows. Vivian thought of the wedding that would have happened in Charleston, the elaborate affair her mother had been planning, and felt nothing but relief that she had escaped it. This simple ceremony, with a man she loved and who loved her in return, was worth more than all the silk and flowers in the world. They signed the marriage certificate, Vivian's hand only shaking slightly as she wrote her new name, Vivian Xavier. Mace noticed. "You all right?" "More than all right. I am happy." He squeezed her hand. "So am I." They spent their wedding night in the hotel in Lordsburg, a rare luxury. The proprietor, the same suspicious woman who had turned Vivian away months ago, looked stunned to see her. "Heard you married the mountain man," she said, eyeing Vivian's buckskin clothing. "Did not expect you would last the winter up there." "I am stronger than I look," Vivian replied evenly. The woman snorted but handed over a key. "Room 3. Breakfast is at 7 if you want it." The room was small and the bed narrow, but it felt like a palace after months of sleeping on the floor by the fire. Mace built up the fire in the small stove and then turned to Vivian. "You are my wife now," he said, wonder in his voice. "And you are my husband." Vivian began unlacing her dress. "What shall we do to celebrate?" The heat in Mace's eyes was answer enough. Spring came slowly to the mountains. The snow melted in fits and starts, revealing dead grass and mud underneath. But gradually, green things began to emerge. Wildflowers painted the meadows in brilliant colors, and the trees leafed out, transforming the landscape once again. Vivian and Mace worked from dawn to dusk, planting a garden 3 times the size of the one Mace had maintained alone. They built an addition onto the cabin, creating a proper bedroom and a larger kitchen. They cleared more land for pasture, thinking ahead to the possibility of raising cattle or sheep. In May, a stranger appeared at their door. Vivian froze when she saw him, dressed in a fine suit that looked absurd in this wilderness setting. He was a Pinkerton detective, she realized with growing dread. Her father had sent someone to find her, after all. "Miss Vivian Thorne?" the man asked, consulting a photograph he held. "Mrs. Vivian Xavier," Mace corrected, moving to stand beside his wife. His hand rested on the knife at his belt, a subtle warning. The detective's eyebrows rose. "I see. Well, Mrs. Xavier, your father has hired me to locate you and inform you that your intended, Mr. Clarence Whitmore, has passed away. He apparently suffered a heart failure in January. Your father wishes you to know that the arrangement is therefore null and void, and you are welcome to return home." Vivian felt Mace tense beside her, but she kept her voice calm. "Please inform my father that I am already home. I have no intention of returning to Charleston." "Your father thought you might say that. He asked me to tell you that you are disinherited. You will receive nothing from the family estate." "I expected as much. Thank you for coming all this way to deliver the message. But as you can see, I am quite well, and have no need of my father's money or his forgiveness." The detective studied her for a long moment, taking in her work-worn hands, her sun-browned skin, the buckskin dress she wore. "You look different from your photograph." "I am different. The woman in that photograph no longer exists." He nodded slowly, tucked the photograph back into his pocket. "I will relay your message to your father. For what it is worth, Mrs. Xavier, you look happy. That is more than most of the society ladies I encounter can say." After he left, Vivian sank down onto the cabin steps, shaking. Mace sat beside her, his arm coming around her shoulders. "Are you all right? Clarence is dead." She started to laugh, a slightly hysterical edge to the sound. "I ran halfway across the country to escape a dead man." "You ran to escape a living nightmare," Mace corrected. "That he is dead now does not change what he was when he was alive." "I know. It is just strange. I spent so many months afraid he would find me, force me to go through with the marriage. And now he is gone, and I am free." She leaned into Mace's solid warmth. "Truly free? You were free the moment you stepped onto that train in Charleston. Everything since has just been you learning how to live that freedom." She tilted her face up to his. "I love you, Mason Xavier." "I love you too." He kissed her forehead. "Now come on. We have work to do if we want to get those potatoes planted before dark." Summer was beautiful in the mountains. The days were warm without the oppressive heat of the south, and the nights cool enough to require blankets. Vivian's garden flourished beyond her expectations, producing more vegetables than they could possibly eat. She spent long hours preserving the surplus, thinking ahead to the next winter. Mace taught her to fish in the streams that ran cold and clear down from the high peaks. They would spend afternoons sitting on the banks, poles in hand, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes they caught fish. Sometimes they did not. It did not really matter. In July, Vivian realized she had missed her monthly courses. When the sickness began in the mornings, she knew for certain. She told Mace one evening after dinner, "I am carrying a child." He went absolutely still, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor's confirmation." Slowly, a smile spread across his face. He set down his cup and crossed to where she sat, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "A child. Our child." Are you happy? She searched his face, trying to read his emotions. Happy? Vivian, I am terrified and thrilled and happier than I have ever been in my life. He placed a hand gently on her still flat stomach. We are going to have a baby. The pregnancy was difficult. Morning sickness lasted well past the first few months, and the summer heat made everything worse. But Mace was endlessly patient, bringing her water when she was sick, fanning her when she was too hot, rubbing her aching back without complaint. As fall approached, Vivian grew anxious about the birth. The nearest doctor was in Lordsburg, a rough 5-mile journey even in good weather. What if the baby came during a snowstorm? Mace arranged for them to stay in Lordsburg for the last month of her pregnancy. It cost money they could ill afford. But he refused to risk Vivian or the baby's life by being too far from help. The baby came in late February, during a blizzard that howled outside the hotel room windows. The local midwife attended the birth, a capable woman who had delivered half the children in Lordsburg. The labor was long and painful, and there were moments when Vivian thought she might die from it. But finally, after hours of struggle, a baby's cry filled the room. "It is a boy," the midwife announced, placing the squalling infant on Vivian's chest. A healthy, strong boy. Vivian looked down at her son, at his red face and shock of dark hair, and felt love slam into her with the force of a physical blow. This was her child, hers and Mace's. Mace knelt beside the bed, his eyes shining with tears. "He is perfect," he said hoarsely. "You are perfect." They named him James, after Mace's father. James Mason Xavier, a mountain baby born during a blizzard who would grow up wild and free in the New Mexico wilderness. The first year of James's life was exhausting. Vivian had never realized how much work an infant could be. She was constantly feeding him, changing him, soothing him when he cried. But she would not have traded it for anything. Mace was a devoted father. He built a cradle from pine wood and carved animals along the sides. He took his son outside every day, showing him the mountains that would be his heritage. He sang to him in the evenings, old songs in his rough voice that somehow always put James to sleep. "You are a natural at this," Vivian told him one night as she watched him rock their son. "I always wanted children, just never thought I would have them. Figured I would die alone in these mountains." He looked at her over James's small head. "You changed everything, Vivian. We changed everything together." As James grew, the cabin seemed to shrink. Mace began planning another addition, a larger living space and a second bedroom for when James was old enough to sleep on his own. They talked about their future, about the possibly starting a small ranch, about the life they wanted to build for their son. When James was 2, Vivian found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect. Their second child, a daughter, was born in September, her arrival quick and relatively painless compared to James's birth. They named her Sarah, after Mace's sister. Sarah Ann Xavier, born with her father's green eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. With 2 children, life became even busier. But it was a good busy, the kind that came from building something lasting. Their family was growing, their home was expanding, and their love for each other only deepened with time. James grew into a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to track animals and identify plants before he could properly read. Sarah was more contemplative, often found sitting quietly and observing the world around her with those keen green eyes. When James was 5 and Sarah 3, Vivian looked around at the life they had built and felt a contentment she had never imagined possible. The cabin had grown into a proper house with 4 bedrooms and a large kitchen. The garden sprawled across nearly an acre now, producing enough food to see them through the winter with plenty left over to sell in Lordsburg. Mace had started a small herd of cattle, just 10 head to start, but it was a beginning. They were not wealthy, not by Charleston standards, but they were rich in the things that mattered: love, family, freedom. One evening in late summer, Vivian stood outside watching the sun set behind the mountains. Mace came to stand beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how I thought my life was over when my father told me I had to marry Clarence Whitmore. About how I was so certain I was running to my death when I fled Charleston." She leaned into him. "I never imagined I would find this. Find you. I was not looking for you either. Was content with my solitary life." He kissed the top of her head. "But now I cannot imagine existing without you. Do you think my father ever wonders about me? About whether I am happy? I do not know, but I hope someday he realizes that letting you go was the greatest gift he ever gave you." James came running around the corner of the house, Sarah toddling after him, both children covered in mud from the stream. "Papa, look what we caught!" James held up a small frog, which immediately leapt from his hands. Mace scooped up Sarah before she could fall, and Vivian grabbed James, and they all ended up laughing as the frog disappeared into the grass. "Bath time," Vivian declared. "Both of you." The children groaned, but allowed themselves to be herded toward the house. As Vivian heated water for the bath, she caught Mace watching her with that soft expression he got sometimes. "What?" she asked. "Just thinking about how lucky I am, how lucky we all are." That night, after the children were asleep and the dishes were cleaned and the fire was banked for the night, Vivian and Mace sat together on their bed. In the 6 years since they had met, gray had started to thread through Mace's dark hair, and lines had deepened around his eyes. Vivian's hands bore the marks of hard work, calloused and strong. They were not the same people who had met on that dusty street in Lordsburg. They had been shaped by the life they had chosen, made stronger by the challenges they had faced together. "Do you ever regret it?" Mace asked quietly. "Giving up the life you could have had?" Vivian thought about the question seriously. She thought about her mother's face, about the house in Charleston with its polished floors and crystal chandeliers, about the dresses and parties and all the trappings of society that had once seemed so important. "No," she said finally. "I regret nothing. That life was a prison dressed in silk. This life, hard as it sometimes is freedom." "Good." He pulled her close. "Because I am never letting you go. I would never want you to." The years continued to pass, marked by seasons rather than social calendars. James grew tall and strong like his father, learning to hunt and trap and survive in the wilderness. Sarah developed a gift for gardening and a love of books that surprised them all. Mace made regular trips to Lordsburg to trade their surplus, and on one such trip, he brought back primers and readers for Sarah. When James was 10, he helped his father build a new barn for the growing cattle herd. When Sarah was 8, she announced she wanted to be a teacher and began studying everything she could get her hands on. Vivian sometimes thought about her old life, about the girl she had been who had climbed out a window in the dead of night. That girl had been terrified, but brave, desperate but determined. She had saved her own life by refusing to accept the fate others had chosen for her. And in saving herself, she had found everything she never knew she wanted. More children came. Another boy, David, when James was 8. Then twins, a boy and girl, Matthew and Martha, when Sarah was 10. The house expanded again and again, and somehow there was always room for one more. Mace built a proper schoolroom for Sarah. who began teaching her younger siblings and eventually the children of neighboring ranches who had sprung up in the intervening years. The wilderness was slowly being tamed, more families settling in the area, drawn by the promise of land and freedom. But the Xavier Ranch remained set apart, a haven in the foothills where the mountains met the desert. Vivian had never returned to Charleston, had never even considered it. This was her home now, these mountains and this land and this family. When Vivian was 40, a letter arrived. It had been forwarded through multiple channels, and the envelope was stained and torn. But inside was a letter from her mother, written in a shaking hand. Vivian sat at the kitchen table and read it with tears streaming down her face. Her father had died 2 years earlier. Her mother was ill and did not expect to live much longer. She wanted Vivian to know that she had never stopped thinking about her, had never stopped hoping she was happy and safe. "I am sorry I was not strong enough to help you when you needed me," her mother had written. "But I am proud of you for being strong enough to save yourself. I hope you have found the happiness you deserve." Vivian wrote back immediately, a long letter describing her life, her family, her happiness. She did not know if her mother would live long enough to receive it, but she had to try. The letter was returned 6 months later, marked addressee deceased. Vivian mourned her mother, but found peace in knowing that her mother had known, at the end, that her daughter had made a good life, that Vivian's desperate flight had led not to ruin, but to redemption. Mace held her as she cried, as he had held her through every joy and sorrow of their life together. "She would be proud of who you have become," he said, "just as I am proud of you every single day." "I miss her," Vivian whispered. "Even though I chose to leave, even though I know I had to, I still miss her. That is all right. Love does not stop just because distance or death separates us. You loved your mother, and she loved you. That love does not need to make sense to anyone but you." The children grew and eventually began to leave. James married a rancher's daughter from up north and started his own place with his father's help. Sarah went to a teacher's college in Santa Fe, determined to get proper credentials. David showed a talent for working with horses and became a sought-after trainer. The twins were still young, only 15 when James married, still figuring out who they wanted to be. But Vivian could see glimpses of the adults they would become. Matthew had his father's quiet strength, Martha her mother's determination. Vivian was 50 when she became a grandmother for the first time, James and his wife producing a red-faced baby boy they named Mace. Holding her grandson, Vivian thought about the circle of life, about how the scared girl fleeing Charleston had become a mother and now a grandmother. "You are thinking too hard," Mace said, watching her rock the baby. "I am thinking about how strange life is, how one decision, one moment of courage can change everything that comes after. No regrets?" She looked at him, at her husband of more than 30 years. His hair was fully gray now, his face weathered by sun and wind. But his eyes were still the same startling green, and they still looked at her with the same love and desire as that first Christmas they had spent together. "Not a single one," she said. They grew old together in the mountains, watching their children build their own lives, watching their grandchildren grow. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. But Vivian and Mace never forgot what it had been like to survive on determination and hope alone. They took in strays sometimes, women running from bad situations, men down on their luck. They provided work and shelter and asked no questions, because they remembered what it was like to need sanctuary. On their 40th anniversary, Mace took Vivian back to Lordsburg, to the spot where they had first met. The town had grown significantly, but the train station remained unchanged. I was sitting right there, Vivian said, pointing to the bench, convinced my life was over. And I was standing over there, trying to work up the courage to talk to you. You did not seem uncertain. You seemed completely confident. Mace laughed. I was terrified. You were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, and I had no idea what to say to you. I nearly talked myself out of it 3 times. But you did not. But I did not. He took her hand. Best decision I ever made. They stood there together, 2 elderly people holding hands on a dusty street, remembering the moment that had changed both their lives. Thank you, Vivian said softly. For what? For giving me the freedom to choose. For never making me feel like I owed you anything. For loving me not despite my past, but including it. Vivian, loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done. You are the strongest, bravest person I know. You saved yourself, built a life from nothing, raised 5 beautiful children, and loved me better than I ever deserved. I should be thanking you. Then we will thank each other. She squeezed his hand. For 40 years of choosing each other every single day. Mace pulled her close and kissed her, right there on the main street of Lordsburg, not caring who saw. And Vivian kissed him back, putting into it all the love and gratitude and joy of 4 decades together. They returned to the ranch as the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. The house was quiet, the children grown and gone, just the 2 of them again, as they had been in the beginning. But the quiet was comfortable, filled with the knowledge of a life well lived, of choices made freely, and love given without reservation. That night, as they settled into bed, Vivian curled against Mace's side, as she had done for 40 years. I love you, she whispered into the darkness. I love you too, he replied. Always have, always will. Vivian drifted off to sleep with a smile on her face, grateful beyond words for the night she had climbed out a window in Charleston, for the train that had carried her west, for the mountain man who had given her not just shelter, but a home. She had fled across 2 states to escape a fate worse than death. And in fleeing, she had found everything worth living for. Years continued to accumulate like snowfall in the mountains, each one adding to the foundation of their life together. Mace's joints grew stiff, and he finally admitted he needed James's help to manage the cattle herd. Vivian's eyesight faded slightly, but she could still tend her garden and prepare meals that brought the family together. The grandchildren multiplied. James and his wife had 4 children. Sarah, who had married a fellow teacher, had 3. David brought home a wife from California and started a family of his own. Even the twins eventually settled down, Matthew taking over the ranch operations while Martha opened a school in Lordsburg. The Xavier name became well known throughout New Mexico territory and beyond. But to Vivian and Mace, the success of the ranch mattered far less than the love that had built it. When Vivian was 65, she received an unexpected visitor. A young woman, barely 20, appeared at the ranch looking exhausted and frightened. She said her name was Catherine, and that she had heard the Xaviers sometimes helped people in trouble. Vivian recognized that look in the girl's eyes, had seen it in her own reflection all those years ago. What kind of trouble are you running from? She asked gently. The story poured out. An arranged marriage to a cruel man, a family that would not listen, a desperate flight westward with nowhere to go. Vivian and Mace exchanged glances, an entire conversation happening in that single look. You can stay here as long as you need, Vivian said. We will find you work if you want it, help you get settled if you decide to move on. But you are safe here. That I can promise. Catherine burst into tears of relief, and Vivian held her, remembering what it had felt like to be utterly alone and terrified. The girl stayed for 6 months, helping around the ranch and the house, gradually relaxing as she realized no one was coming to drag her back. Eventually, she decided to move to Santa Fe, where Sarah helped her find a position as a clerk in a dry goods store. "Thank you," Catherine said on the day she left. "Thank you for giving me hope that life could be different." After she left, Mace put his arm around Vivian's shoulders. "That was a good thing you did." "We did," Vivian corrected, "just like someone did for me once. I did not do anything special, just offered you work. You offered me respect, freedom, a choice. That was everything." Over the years, they helped a dozen more women in similar situations, and a few men too, running from violence or persecution or simply looking for a fresh start. The Xavier Ranch became known as a place of sanctuary, and Vivian took fierce pride in that reputation. When Vivian was 70, she finally wrote her story down. Not for publication, but for her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, so they would know where they came from and what their grandmother had survived. She wrote about Charleston and Clarence Whitmore and the terror of fleeing into the unknown. She wrote about meeting Mace and learning what real love looked like. She wrote about building a life from nothing and finding joy in unexpected places. Martha, who had inherited her mother's love of teaching, asked if she could use the story in her classroom. "To show the girls that they have choices," she explained, "that they do not have to accept what someone else decides for them." Vivian agreed, though she insisted her name be changed in the version Martha shared. She did not want fame or recognition. She just wanted other women to know that escape was possible, that a different life could be built. Mace's health began to fail when he was 75. Nothing dramatic, just a gradual slowing, a weariness that rest could not cure. He still worked on the ranch when he could, but increasingly he spent his days in a chair on the porch, watching the mountains and remembering. Vivian stayed close, unwilling to leave his side for long. They had been together for 50 years, and the thought of existing without him was unbearable. But she knew this was the way of things, that life eventually gave way to death, and all she could do was treasure every moment they had left. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Mace reached for her hand. "I need you to promise me something," he said, his voice rough with age and emotion. "Anything. When I am gone, do not hide yourself away. Keep living. Keep helping people who need it. Keep being the strong, brave woman I fell in love with." Tears slid down Vivian's cheeks. "I do not know if I can be strong without you. You were strong before you met me. I just had the privilege of watching that strength flourish." He squeezed her hand. "Promise me, Vivian." "I promise," she whispered. Mace died 3 weeks later, peacefully in his sleep, Vivian holding his hand. The entire family gathered for the funeral, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filling the house to capacity. They buried him on a hillside overlooking the ranch, where he could watch over the land he had loved. Vivian stood at his grave long after everyone else had left, saying goodbye to the man who had changed her life. "Thank you," she said to the freshly turned earth. "Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible. Thank you for loving me when I felt unlovable. Thank you for 50 years of choosing me every single day." The wind whispered through the pines, and Vivian imagined it was Mace answering, telling her he loved her still. True to her promise, Vivian did not hide away in her grief. She continued to run the ranch with James and Matthew's help, continued to open her home to those who needed sanctuary, continued to live fully even though half her heart was buried on that hillside. She told stories about Mace to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive through words. She taught her great-grandchildren how to garden and preserve food, passing down the skills he had taught her. She watched the sun set behind the mountains every evening and felt his presence in the beauty of it. Vivian lived to be 87 years old, dying peacefully in the house Mace had built, surrounded by her family. Her last words were, "Tell your grandfather I am coming home." They buried her beside Mace on the hillside, and the family gathered once more to remember a woman who had changed all their lives by having the courage to change her own. Years later, Martha's daughter would publish Vivian's story, and it would inspire countless women to seek their own freedom, to make their own choices, to refuse to accept fates chosen by others. The Xavier Ranch would remain in the family for generations, a testament to what two people could build when they chose love over convention, freedom over security, each other over everything else. And on certain evenings, when the light hit the mountains just right, people swore they could see two figures standing on the hillside, hand in hand, watching over the land they had carved from wilderness and built into something lasting. The story of the woman who fled an arranged marriage across 2 states, and the mountain man who gave her the freedom to choose him instead, became legend in New Mexico. But to those who had known Vivian and Mace, it was simply the truth. That love, real love, was built on respect and choice, and the daily decision to show up for each other, no matter what challenges life presented. Their great-great-grandchildren would eventually inherit the ranch, and they would keep alive the tradition of offering sanctuary to those who needed it. The mountains would remain constant, indifferent to the passage of human lives. But the Xavier name would be remembered as one that stood for courage, compassion, and the radical idea that every person deserved the freedom to choose their own path. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the work was done and the family gathered, someone would tell the story again. About the scared young woman who arrived in Lordsburg with nothing but a carpetbag and desperate hope, and the mountain man who saw past her, fear to the strength beneath, and how together they had built something beautiful that lasted far beyond their years. It was a love story, yes, but more than that, it was a story about choice, about the power of deciding your own fate. Even when the world tells you that decision is not yours to make. About finding someone who respects your autonomy enough to let you choose them freely every single day. And it was a reminder, passed down through generations, that courage does not always look like fighting. Sometimes it looks like running, like climbing out a window in the dead of night, like boarding a train to somewhere unknown. Sometimes courage looks like accepting help from a stranger, like learning new skills, like building a new life from nothing. And sometimes courage looks like love, like opening your heart to someone even when you have every reason to protect it, like trusting that this time will be different, that this person will see you as you truly are and love you not despite your past, but including it. The mountains stood eternal, watching over the ranch where Vivian and Mace had built their life. The seasons changed, snow giving way to spring, summer fading into fall. Children were born and grew old, the cycle continuing as it always had and always would. But the love story at the heart of it all, the tale of two people who chose each other against all odds and built something lasting from that choice. That story never faded. It was told and retold, adapted and embellished, but at its core remained the same simple truth. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is run, and sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the freedom to choose you in return. The Xavier legacy lived on, not in money or land, though both were abundant, but in the lives they had touched and the example they had set. That a woman did not need to accept the fate others chose for her. That a man could respect a woman's autonomy without diminishing his own strength. That love built on mutual respect and freely given choice would always be stronger than anything built on obligation or force. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the wealth they had accumulated or the land they had claimed, but the love they had shared, and the family they had built, and the ripples of courage that spread out from their choices, inspiring others to be brave enough to choose their own paths. The story of Vivian and Mason Xavier became woven into the fabric of New Mexico history, a testament to the power of choice, the strength of love, and the courage it takes to build a life on your own terms. And their descendants carried that legacy forward, generation after generation, keeping alive the memory of the woman who fled across 2 states and the mountain man who gave her the freedom to choose him instead. It was a love story for the ages, simple and profound, heartbreaking and hopeful. And it all began with a scared young woman sitting on a train station bench, and a mountain man who saw past her fear to the person she could become, if only someone gave her the chance.